Hello everyone, thank you and welcome back to my channel. I'm Megan, the Healing Foods Coach, and I'm really glad that you've decided to take time out of your busy days and come back to the channel. So thank you for that. Thank you for all of your likes, your comments. Thank you for everyone who's subscribed, and I really appreciate your support. So today's topic is around cholesterol, but specifically I want to talk about something that is called familial hypercholesterolemia and what it is and how it can affect people, because it is something I have been recently diagnosed with having. So let me start off first, of course, by saying that cholesterol is a necessary part of our bodies. We need it to form cells. It's what our brains are made out of. Every cell in our body, almost if not all, needs cholesterol to some degree. So cholesterol itself is not a problem. We require it. We have to have it. Okay. If we have none, we won't live. We'll die. So we do need cholesterol, and our bodies can make about 70% of the cholesterol it requires. Now, also, cholesterol is a precursor. It's a prerequisite in order for hormones to be made. Okay. For example, things like the sex hormones, estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. It is also required for things like running the thyroid, and that then controls things like metabolism and other functions of the body. So we have to have cholesterol. Okay. And since we can only make about 70% of what our body needs to function, we have to get the rest of it from dietary sources. And I will say straight up that, first of all, I absolutely agree, believe, and practice that saturated fats are the best sources of cholesterol. They're the most bioavailable. They're the most easily, they're the ones that are most easily for our bodies to take, digest, metabolize, and then turn into other things that will eventually become cholesterol in our bodies. So let me get that out of the way first. Now, there are issues with not necessarily the cholesterol in our blood, but the lipoproteins that transports the cholesterol. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so a lot of you guys will already know this. I made notes, so if I'm looking down, that's why, because I want to make sure I'm saying these things correctly. So cholesterol in and of itself does not get around the body simply on its own. It has to be transported. You can't just eat a steak with maybe a bit of butter to the side and then therefore you magically get cholesterol in your body. No. That gets digested, it all gets broken down into its necessary components, and later on the body uses that to make more cholesterol that it requires. But the cholesterol itself doesn't just float through the blood. It has to be transported. And it's done so in transporters called lipoproteins. Fat transponders. Transporters, I should say. Sorry. Basically, think of them kind of like fat transporters. Cholesterol is made out of fat. Or, fat is used to make cholesterol. And there are two main types. There are the high density lipoproteins, which people call the good proteins. When we're talking about HDL cholesterol, actually HDL literally means high density lipoproteins that contain cholesterol within them, that take those to the cells that require them, transport them, and then those cells are able to then later on absorb the cholesterol out of the HDL into them. They're the cleanup. They're the cleanup cholesterol. So they go in and help make sure that everything's running properly. Okay, so that's the high density lipoproteins containing cholesterol. And the other ones, and actually there's not just one type of low density lipoproteins, the LDL, which is always called the bad cholesterol, but we still need some of it to function. But there's actually numerous different types of LDL lipoproteins, not just one. I believe up to 13 have actually been discovered and acknowledged. So there are 13 different kinds of low density lipoproteins that carry cholesterol to different cells in our body. And these are always referred to as bad, but in fact, that's a little bit misleading. And what it, I think, is that the low density lipoproteins, okay, they have, they are the key deliverer of cholesterol that goes to our artery walls. But the greatest abundance of what are called the atherogenic lipoproteins that are in our plasma are found in the low density lipoproteins. And something that is atherogenic is anything that becomes a risk factor for cardiovascular disease and myocardial infarction, heart attacks. Okay, so when we're talking about the bad cholesterol, it's not necessarily the cholesterol that's an issue, it's not necessarily the low density lipoproteins that are the problem, or even the cholesterol on its own. But what happens is the lower density lipoproteins are more easily able to get to it says in here, are more easily able to get into the artery walls. And if they become oxidized, if they have issues with, if they have, perhaps there's a high level of remnant lipoproteins, or they're oxidized, in which case they are more easily able to develop into something that is bad. So they could potentially end up building into plaque if they're oxidized. They can also contribute towards developing into cancers. Okay, so these types of cholesterols, the low density lipoproteins, are the ones that can end up building up in the arteries, which can cause plaque and can potentially lead to heart disease. So it isn't the cholesterol per se on its own, but it's these atherogenic cholesterol within the lipoproteins, that low density lipoproteins that can cause potential problems. And basically what I was shocked when I was told, yes, I still have, I was told 5 years ago that I had familial hypercholesterolemia, and I was put on a statin, and my numbers came down, my triglycerides came down. I also cut out all carbohydrates and all processed junk food, and I lost 100 pounds. And I started to eventually, over this past year at least, become more active, and all of those things had kept everything in check. Now, I didn't understand what the full implication was of having familial hypercholesterolemia. I didn't quite get what that meant. I thought it meant, oh, I have too much bad cholesterol. But if I cut out the carbs, if I do all these other things, then surely that's fine. I don't have to stay on a statin. So last year, I wanted to try coming off the statin because I figured my bloods looked like they were lined up now. Hopefully they would stay that way, and I wouldn't need to keep taking a statin, because there are some potential long-term effects of that as well. So I came off the statin. I went in last week for my regular annual checkup, which I hadn't had in a couple of years. And of course, all my cholesterol was right back up again. And I expected that to be the case because, of course, I am eating a carnivorous diet. That isn't necessarily a surprise to have cholesterol levels go up, because I'm only eating animal proteins and saturated fat. That's it. So I sort of expected that. So the fact that my high density lipoprotein score has gone up a bit, not super worried. It's because I'm eating animal proteins and fats. I'm not going to stop doing that. However, my LDL has gone up, as well as my triglycerides, which I was told originally it was my processed foods and all the fruit I was eating that was initially causing me issues 5 years ago. And of course, I've had no carbs of any kind in just over 4 years, so I didn't understand what the problem was. And that is when my doctor said, well, you still have familial hypercholesterolemia. So I went and looked it up, of course, right? But here's basically what it is. First of all, it's a genetic disease. It's something I inherited from my father, who had it, and he inherited it from his father, who also had it. And basically what it means is that when you have hypercholesterolemia, your body is unable to effectively clear the atherogenic cholesterol that is found particularly in the low density lipoproteins in the blood. So the higher your LDL rating is, the higher amount of atherogenic cholesterol is in your blood. And this is the stuff that can lead to artery blockage and coronary heart disease if we're not careful. So the higher those numbers are, the more atherogenic cholesterol is involved, the higher your risk of coronary heart disease. Right. Now, this is made worse for people who have type 2 diabetes, if they have hypertension, they have blood pressure, they have a diet of processed foods. Pardon my dogs. Sorry about that. My dog saw a cat outside. Okay, so in addition to still having, and it's something you're born with, and it may not appear, you may not have cholesterol issues until later in, like, you know, it may not build up to the point where you have issues, or that may not show up on a blood test until you might be in your late teens, early 20s. And I never had any of that stuff checked at that age. And so for me, it was always there. I just never knew, because I never bothered to have it looked at. I just figured, oh, my blood pressure's fine. I don't smoke. I don't really drink. I was going through severe restricting, binging and purging, so I wasn't eating a whole lot. So I figured I was fine. Couldn't be asked to check it out at that point, but it was always there. Okay, it's a genetic condition. And on top of that, I also was told that I have dyslipidemia. And what that means is that's an additional risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Now, it's more common with people who have metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. None of those of which I have anymore. However, I do have a decreased number of small HDL particles. I do have an increasing amount of oxidized LDL. I do have an increased level of remnant lipoproteins, and of course, increased amounts of small, dense, low density lipoproteins, because I have hypercholesterolemia. So these two things kind of go together. So not only do I have a lipid, what they call a lipid abnormality, in that I have all these additional things happening, but because I have hypercholesterolemia, my body's unable to effectively clear out the atherogenic lipoproteins, or atherogenic cholesterol that is in the lipoproteins that are in my body. And I was wanting desperately to not have to take a statin, but I also realized I've done everything else I can outside of a statin in order to have the best possible outcome, which is I don't eat carbs or processed junk. And I've cleared that out, and I've lost weight, and I'm more active, and I'm active all the time. However, because of the hypercholesterolemia, I'm still having high readings. And I wanted to share that because as amazing as carnivorous eating is, and it is, but there are still sometimes some factors that cannot be fixed just through diet. And I wanted to put that out there, as I would not eat any other way. I have no intention to eat any other way. I love eating this carnivorous diet, and I will not change it because it has allowed me to lose weight. So I'm no longer obese. I'm active every day now, and have been for over a year. Obviously, I was able to get my total cholesterol and my low density lipoprotein levels down, yes, through statins, but then of course through cutting out carbohydrates and processed food. And I've never smoked and I don't drink. So those are never issues. However, I will always have higher levels of low density lipoproteins. And of course, the issue with that is that the majority of mine are not the nice, large, fluffy ones that some people get. Mine are still very much small, dense, low density lipoproteins, which have the highest risk of oxidization or ending up in the artery walls. And so that's where issues can come. That's where you can get plaque buildup. And you know, my grandfather was super healthy, never smoked, hardly drank, did not eat processed foods because that wasn't part of his generation. And yet he suffered 2 heart attacks in his life, one before the age of 50, the other one around 60, and he had cancer twice. And otherwise, he was very slim, he was super active, he ate well, he took care of himself, and yet those things happened. And that was because of the hypercholesterolemia. And he also had lipid abnormality, which I happen to have as well. And so I want to say that as much as I would say, for the most part, overall, a lot of times people don't need to take a statin. Sometimes there are some things that we simply cannot change or fix that allow us to avoid taking one. And so I wanted to be completely honest about it with you guys and share with you kind of what's had me a bit spooked. Now, I'm not worried, you know, I'm not, because I've had this my whole life. I'm 52, so I've had no other heart disease issues. I think because I got healthy when I did, it has helped significantly. But I think if the lipid doctor, and from what I've studied for myself, as well as what I've come to understand about cholesterol and the dangers of high levels of atherogenic lipoproteins, that I am not going to say no to taking the statins. And I know there are also potentially long-term effects, but considering that I have a genetic condition as well as a lipid abnormality in my person, which my father had and my grandfather had as well, and my father did have a heart attack around 45, I'm not going to take any chances. And one of the other things I wanted to say is that it's interesting sometimes the knock-on effect that these conditions can have on other conditions. So as I say, I as it turns out, I had hypercholesterolemia. I was born with it. It's a genetic condition I was born with. It didn't appear. It probably appeared in my late teens, maybe in my 20s. But again, I wasn't going out of my way to see the doctor at that point. So I never had it tested, but it would have always been there. But a fair bit of the low density lipoproteins that I have at the moment are oxidized. And I also have an increasing level of remnant lipoproteins because I'm unable to effectively clear the low density lipoproteins and the atherogenic cholesterol within them that's in my blood. And that is a potential risk. But I've done everything else I can. I've lost all the weight. I don't eat junk food. I no processed anything, no carbs of any kind. And actually, it's crazy. But when I was checking into the NHS England website, they themselves have even said, and I'm going to quote here, a low carbohydrate diet may help improve lipoprotein levels in people with atherogenic cholesterol, although the amount of total or saturated fat in the diet has little effect. So that's a good sign. That means I can keep enjoying animal meat, animal sources of protein and fat and saturated fat because it's not going to make things any worse, which is good. But the other thing that I ended up developing, because I was obese and because I had such high cholesterol levels, again, in and of themselves is not an issue, but for me, because of all that cholesterol I have in my body, a good part of it is atherogenic, which is in other words, potentially high risk associated with it between that and, say, cardiovascular disease and things like cancer, my body does not effectively clear it out. And so that has left me with remnant lipoproteins. So it's kind of like you have these lipoproteins, and these are referring to the low density lipoproteins, of which most of mine are still small, dense, low density lipoproteins. I don't have the large fluffy ones, which are considered to be okay. So I think it's safe to say that in my case, based on what I've been told by my doctor, what I was told previously by the lipid specialist, in this case, statins makes a lot of sense. Now, I'm not offering you medical advice. I can't, obviously, and certainly look into it further. But if you are living with something like hypercholesterolemia and a lipid abnormality, in wherein you're not simply just looking at higher cholesterol levels, which total cholesterol will generally go up a bit if you are eating sources of animal protein and fat, because that's all saturated fats, which by the way is not a problem. Okay, so again, even the NHS England says that low carbohydrates are a good way of trying to lower, so lowering your carbohydrates or eliminating them can be effective in reducing your lipid levels, your lipoproteins. In other words, reducing the low density lipoproteins that you have in your blood, which is probably a good thing in this case. And that saturated fat does not seem to have any effect, neither positive nor negative, right? Total fats or even saturated. In other words, carry on eating them, because that is not the issue. But if you are like me and you have been diagnosed, whether with hypercholesterolemia or suspected, you're also going to have, not only are you going to have higher levels in your blood, but you're also going to be unable to clearly, effectively clear and remove all of the atherogenic ones. And that's where the risk comes in. The atherogenic ones are the ones that tend to have a high risk that build up in the arteries and can then cause heart disease. So I wanted to share that. Sorry, I was excited. I got all of this cool information. I typed it out. I looked it up. I made sure that I was aware of why a statin was recommended. If it was just regular high cholesterol, if I was not dealing with hypercholesterolemia, if my body was able to effectively clear out the atherogenic cholesterol and therefore allow maybe for some of the low density lipoproteins to become the larger fluffy kind and not the small dense kind that can very much signal problems, I probably wouldn't even worry about it. I probably wouldn't bother with the statin. However, that is not the case with me. And it's hard because sometimes you have these things and you don't even realize, you may not even understand what's happening. It was a shock to me initially, because here I was following this great carnivorous diet. I lost all the weight, doing well, feeling amazing, off the statins for a year. And when I went back for my blood work last week, all of a sudden, boom, it was way up there again, like well above the recommended parameters. Okay. And again, I'm referring to the low density lipoproteins. The high density lipoproteins, I expected those levels to go up because, again, I'm only eating animal sources of protein and saturated fat. So I'm not worried about those readings. But it's the other ones that are the issue, because most of mine, as I've shared, I know I've shared already, but most of mine are small and dense and oxidized. And I have a lot of remnant lipoproteins in the blood because I can't clear it all out. And from what I understand, the longer they're in the blood, the higher the chance of them becoming oxidized or ending up in the arterial walls, which is not where you want. You just want the lipoproteins to transport the cholesterol through the blood to the cells where they're needed. And then that's it, right? But when they don't, that's when problems can occur. So anyways, I hope this was helpful. I don't know if it was. This is just information that I've thoroughly researched. Again, I went to the NHS England website. For those of you who don't live over in this part of the world, that's the National Health Services website. And I looked up all this information. And so I think when I'm offered a statin, I'm going to accept in this case because of these ongoing factors. I don't want to end up by mistake like my grandfather, you know, feeling healthy, feeling great, and then all of a sudden, blam, having a heart attack when I have the option to prevent that. So, and I know there are long-term potential effects and side effects, but in this case, I think the possibility of the benefits far outweighs the potential risks. And so I wanted to share that with everybody because I want to be fully transparent. I want you guys to kind of know what's been up. That's what I've been researching the last couple of days. This is what I've been working on, which is why I didn't have content yesterday. But that's why I put it up today. So, and I had a whole really nice presented, typed out little bit of notes that I wanted to make sure I referred to. So that's today's topic. I hope it's helpful. It turns out there's more of us that have this than don't. Far more than I expected. I thought it was some rare, horrible condition. It's not. It's a genetic condition, but a lot of people have it. A lot of people don't even realize they have it. So definitely make sure you're getting full lipid panels done annually. Okay. And if you have a parent or a grandparent who, you know, has had a heart attack or some kind of cardiovascular disease or a stroke and seem to be otherwise fairly healthy, I would definitely get it looked into, you know, because again, it's a genetic condition, and certainly avoiding smoking and alcohol and processed foods and carbs and crap will help. It will help, but it will not eliminate the potential risks. They can still be there. So get yourself tested and get it checked out. Okay. That's all I'm saying. And if you're fine, awesome, fabulous. I hope you are. But then at least you know what you could potentially be dealing with, because otherwise there's not, unless you're getting your bloods checked properly, then you may never know that this is an issue. So that is it. Sorry guys. I really wanted to make this content and share it with you. I really hope it's helpful, and not everyone has it. Fair enough. But this is what I was looking into for the past couple of days. I hope the presentation made sense, but as always, feel free to share your comments, your thoughts. If you have questions, I will try to answer them or refer you to the places where I found this information. If you have more questions, more details, but I hope it's helpful. That's what I do when I hear something I don't understand, and instead of diving into a panic, which I can often do, my solution is to try to get the information and then absorb it, understand it, share it, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who has ever dealt with this diagnosis. Anyways, I hope that's helpful. Thank you guys so much for all of your kind words and your support, and I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thank you, by the way, because you stuck with it and you watched it all the way to the end. It's a longer one, a little bit more information this time, but I appreciate that. And I will see you guys in the next video, which should be very soon. Have yourselves a great day, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.